Second step, reliance. So here we would visualize a typical practice all the lamas and all the traditions would do from the Vajrayana. We'd visualize Vajrasattva. So Vajrasattva is a Buddha that's the tantric aspect of Shakyamuni, that's all. White. The tantric aspect of Shakyamuni. Another aspect, in the bodhisattva aspect, white, light, blissful, radiant bodhisattva aspect. And is particularly related to emptiness because it's the realization of emptiness that purifies finally all negative karma. So here we visualize the first part of reliance, you take refuge. So you can say a little prayer there, or you can just delight that you've got a person who's medicines, because you do the work. You visualize Buddha, but you do the purifying. You do the purifying. So there we would take refuge in the Buddha. Now the second part of reliance, this is now where we have compassion for those we've harmed. So here you regret, it's like you regret now for their sake. In the first step, regret, we regret for our own sake because we're sick of suffering. The second step, the second part of the second step, reliance, is now where we have compassion for those we have harmed. I regret for their sake. I must purify for their sake. That's compassion. Now, if you're brave enough, you can now have compassion for those who've harmed you. If you're brave enough. Why? Because the people who have harmed you, they will suffer in the future too. That's the reason to have compassion for others, because they will suffer in the future. But if you're not ready to forgive them, that's okay, leave it there. So the third step is the remedy. Now you do the practice, and there's many variations of all this, but a simple one is you're visualizing Vajrasattva above your crown, you're just using your creative imagination. That's what they mean by visualization. You're visualizing nectar pouring down from the Buddha, filling you completely, a really simple way to do, and leaving you all the imprints of all the negative actions you've ever done since beginning this time, leaving through the lower part of your body like filthy water. It's a simple way to do it. It's just visualizing, imagining, as you say the mantra. If you know the long mantra, best. If you're not, just the short one. And this is the remedy. And all the lamas say, okay, the third step is often called the antidote. It's the opposite to the thing. So the antidote every day is obviously what you should do. So if you're regretting killing, in your daily life you try and save creatures, you'd maybe help sick people. That's an antidote to harming others. If you're regretting lying, you make a conscious effort to tell the truth. It's obvious. But this practice, this third one where you visualize the Buddha, is said to be the most potent of all the practices because it's relating to the Buddha. All the practices where we involve the Buddha, just because of the power of enlightened beings, is so much more powerful purification. So the third step is you just visualize, imagining nectar pouring in from the Buddha above your head, totally purifying every atom of all the negative imprints since beginningless time that disappear out through your lower parts of your body like filthy liquid. It's a wonderful little visualization. Sincerely, saying a few mantras. There's more elaborate ways you can do it, one can learn. The fourth step, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, the most important. The resolve to change. This is where you make a difference. So the first, I have to regret bad-mouthing Kabir. I'm sick of the suffering. I'm sick of this old habit. I'm sick of this suffering, not to mention the future suffering that might come to me. And then the second step is I turn to the Buddha. I have, refuge. Then I have compassion for Kabir. I have to think about his suffering that I'm causing. The third is I do the purification. But the fourth one is where the changes happen. I have got to decide for a timeline. Don't lie to yourself, as Lama Zopa says. If my worst habit is to badmouth Kabir, then to him, because he's my boyfriend, then I don't say I'll never badmouth him again. You say, okay, I'm doing my purification at the end of the day, and I will say, I will not badmouth Kabir for 10 more hours. And guess what? I'll be asleep. I'll keep my vow. So you get confidence from it. And the next day I will say, I will not badmouth him for 12 hours. And before you know it, you've got to keep your vow because you've made a vow. You've made a decision. You put yourself on track, As Pabonka Rinpoche says, this is the most important one. This is where the changes occur. But if you can't regret it, and Lama Zopa says that's the most important, if you can't own it and be sick of suffering, then you can't do the changing. This is why we get all so caught up in our relationships with our mother, our father, our people. We keep bickering, we keep fighting, we keep talking about them because we never really consciously regret because we're sick of suffering. We never really have the compassion for the harm we're doing. We just get guilty. We don't really purify and we don't really resolve to change. If we engage in this every day, this is such a potent practice. And this is why I'm purposely saying it like psychology, not adding all the prayers and the pujas and the other stuff to it, which we can get confused about. Just do, oh, I've done my Vajrasattva practice, we'll say. But you can be engaged in these 4 steps. These are, Tsongkhapa says, this is what purification is. It is psychological. This is how you change. And you get confidence from it. Because there's no karma we can't purify. There is no karma we cannot purify. And as Rama Yeshe says, it's purification is the power of this regret, the power of the reliance, the power of the remedy, and the power of resolve. We do this every day. So doing this, plus living in vows, is like you just got a most brilliant, perfect practice. You couldn't wish for better. Add a bit of bodhicitta? Yeah, absolutely. Add a bit of Buddha, a bit of faith? Amazing. But this gives you the infrastructure of a powerful practice. Puts atomic bombs on all the negative rubbish, the old habits, the old imprints. And this is what purifies at a deep level, that enables us to get realizations, that enables us to see our minds more clearly and start to develop and understand emptiness and bodhicitta, you know. And of course it's going to bring all the dirt up, there's no question. Are we communicating? Yes. So it's you doing this practice with yourself. Don't just think of it as some holy thing you're supposed to do. Oh, I did my Vajrasattva mantras. That's only the 3rd step. You've got to do all 4 and engage in it with yourself. It's like being your own best friend, I tell you. Yes?
The virtue that is created, the virtue that you create by keeping your vow every single day for continuously 30 days, vis-a-vis the one that you create for, that you vow that, okay.
I'm a bit lost. Sorry, start again.
So I say that I will not lie the next 24 hours, and then I don't do. I do that, and then I renew the vow. I keep doing that for a period of 30 days.
So then?
I create some virtue out of that. And another is that I say that, okay, I will not lie for 1 month, and I don't lie, and I keep.
So what's the question?
So the virtue that I create in both the scenarios, is that the same? Or
I didn't see the difference. Please forgive me. I can't quite hear the difference. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Say it again.
So one is, I say that I will not lie for 1 month. And I create some virtue when I keep my vow.
Then?
Another scenario is I say that I will not lie for a period of 24 hours or 1 day. And I keep renewing that for...
Well, you see, darling, it's not static. It's like you build it up every day. It's like you're doing push-ups every day. You keep getting better at it. You keep getting stronger. And you're developing the habit. That's the only reason you say it like that. Until eventually it's your natural habit. It grows, it builds, darling. It's not some static thing. It builds energy. It's unbelievable. That's how you program yours. It's called learning. If you play the piano every day, you don't say, okay, I'll play the piano for 24 hours. Then 74 years later, I'll just play the piano for 24 hours. Honey, you become Mozart by now. It's dynamic energy that grows you. You use skillful means for your own mind according to your capability. But it's dynamic. It's massive. It's how you transform yourself.
But if you break a vow, which is a strong...
Well, first of all, just don't leap to the next point. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Now, what's your next question?
So if you break a vow...
So first of all, the vows we're discussing here are just in general a little vow to ourselves. But I'm then also talking about the vows when you take the vows of the Buddhist vows and you sit in front of somebody and you plug into this vows that I'm describing here, the very powerful vows, which are lifelong vows. So if you break a lifelong vow, these vows here, if you break, so that's particular, you've got 5 layperson's vows. When you become a Buddhist, you take these vows, or afterwards. And if you kill a human being intentionally, knowing it's a vow, not caring and not trying to change it, which is pretty heavy, then you break it at the root. And you must take it again from a person. If you break in a minor way, you kill another sentient being. So then that's why you have to purify every day, because we're human. We're going to weaken our vows sometimes, but you take it very seriously and you attempt not to. We've got many, many vows. There's no way we're keeping them perfectly. So that's why we've got to be very conscious. And that's why we have to purify every day. Sincerely. I mean, with sincerity. It's like growing every day. You play the piano, you make mistakes, you vow to change, and you keep doing it, So that's how you grow. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah? We've got to be sincere and know the benefit of it to ourselves. Do you understand? Not just some religious thing, Because it's massive. The power of the mind doing this is incredible. This is really what practice is, which means working on your mind every day. It's stupendous, you know, because we're taking responsibility. We're becoming conscious. Do you understand? Someone else? Yes.
Little unrelated. But
Yeah.
if you are dying for forgiveness from Kabir, and he's not forgiving you and not letting you feel love,
That's right.
what is the compassion that you decide to show to
I
him?
understand.
Yeah.
See, this is a really interesting point for me also, bringing the point that if we only think that forgiveness is the thing that gets us off the hook, then you feel relieved. Oh, you know, when he says to me, sorry, Robina, I still love you, I'm so relieved, because every time you're mean to him, you feel guilty, you're terrified he's going to give you up. That's why we have all this guilt inside, like this ego is racking, it's destroying us. So all I want is for him to get me off the hook. Oh, thank God he still loves me. Phew, I got away with it, sort of thing. So that's, first of all, why just getting forgiven isn't enough. But then the trouble is, because of that, when he stops finally forgiving me, then I'm shattered. I'm destroyed, because my belief is that his no longer forgiving me means I'm a bad person, and that's even more torture. Whereas if we don't rely on the forgiving, I know it's necessary. It's necessary to ask him to forgive me. It's a very good thing to do, but I've got to also do this inner work. And then even if he doesn't forgive me, it's okay, because you heal yourself. You actually learn ending up feeling sorry for him, because he's just, and you really feel ashamed, because you know that your prodding him all those years has been part of the cause of why he's now bitter and angry, and he won't forgive you. And so you really, you really feel some kind of real remorse for that, because you know you've been part of it. But you'll have genuine compassion, because you'll know that he's harming himself. He's harming himself is the key to compassion. What compassion is, the Buddha's view of compassion, is based upon the understanding of karma. When we understand the first step, that I am suffering because of my own ridiculous rubbish, then I can see why others are suffering. And that's why the view in Buddhism, you can't have compassion for others until you've understood karma. That's the teaching. Because compassion is not just for a few people, it's for all sentient beings. And the real reason bodhisattvas have such compassion for us is because we are ignorant of karma. We don't realize we're the source of our own pain. That's the tragedy. So when you have that for yourself, then you can really have compassion for someone else, because you know they're destroying themselves. Do you understand? But it's hard to get. It's hard to feel this, you know. Recently, there's a person, it doesn't matter who it is, a friend of mine in Australia, who's the mother of her daughter is a completely paranoid, negative, deluded, seriously suffering person. Do you understand what I'm saying? Who causes so much trouble, constantly mean. So for me, whenever I hear her, because of this Buddhist view, my heart breaks for this woman. She's completely destroying herself. But all they see is this maniac who's evil, who harms the daughter. And I said to one of my friends, oh, but she's so much suffering. They say, don't be ridiculous. Because when you say a person's suffering, we think, oh, the poor thing can't help it. But we understand that delusions are breaking our heart. Then it's easy to see how maniacs are harming themselves, and that's why they harm others. So the view of compassion isn't just this sentimental idea we tend to confine to victims, you know, or the poor thing. It's much broader view of compassion. It's the Bodhisattva's view, but we've got to get that first ourselves. We've got to have this kind of compassion for ourselves instead of beating ourselves up, that my attachment causes me suffering, my anger causes me suffering, my depression causes me suffering, and that's why I harm others. We can see that link for ourselves. It's not difficult to have compassion for all the wackos, you know, for the real maniacs, because it's not sentimental. And then you realise if, let's say, your friend won't forgive you, you only can have compassion because you realise his bitterness is harming him, isn't it? Do you understand? It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes, and you're also feeling that by asking for that forgiveness, you're weighing on him in a certain way that...
I don't know about that part. I'm not sure about that part.
Okay.
If you keep asking him and begging him, then you're making him responsible, and that's what people sometimes do. Because I'm feeling guilty, and I demand that he better forgive me because I can feel better. So actually, my begging forgiveness is actually self-centered.
Exactly.
I want to get off the hook. That's why, you know, if he doesn't want to forgive me, that's his call. But you know, don't make him responsible to get me off the hook. Which is how we're so manipulative with each other, you know, with our emotions. It's very tricky, but especially mummies and children and partners, you know. So much emotional kind of blackmailing. It's really heavy, isn't it? Oh. What else, people? Any questions? 7:45. We won't finish late tonight. I'm sorry about yesterday. No questions. Is it clear, people? Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. So this is, you see, we're now talking about death, dying. In Rinpoche's book, first of all, the main part of it is like what to do the weeks and months before your loved one dies, or months and weeks. And this is and the assumption here, of course, is a person who's dying gradually. You know, your old mummy, the person's got cancer, which of course is the best way to die for a Buddhist. I mean, certainly in the West, the materialists say, let me just die in my sleep so I won't know about it. But that's about the worst way to die, because, you know, they don't think there's any consequences. The best way to die is to die gradually, to be aware so you can start to practice. So Rinpoche's then divided up the different sections. He's got so many practices. And the book itself, the PDF that you can download, you see it on page 2, the link. There's like, the back of the book is 87 different practices, all kinds of practices. He's got so many, you know. So most of us will not do 90% of them. That's perfectly fine. As Rinpoche says, if you want to just do one practice, the medicine Buddha, the weeks and months, the days, the hours, at the time and afterwards, perfect. You couldn't wish for better. But Rinpoche's got all these different kinds of practices that he recommends, you know. So one lot, in the week, the practices to do the weeks and months before the loved one dies, is divided into different sections. What to touch and see. He's into all those things like blessing strings, being blessed, then touching the skin, mantras on the body, a text on the crown, touch a prayer wheel, you know, these things. See the pictures of your gurus, see the pictures of, of the Buddha, see a prayer wheel, all these things. Rinpoche is into all these things. And of course, if we're holy Buddhists, we'll all accept it. Because whatever the Buddha's view is, whatever we experience through any of our senses leaves impressions. I think especially this one and this one, you know. For animals too, this is the point. This is how you can help your animals unbelievably. Your poor animal can't do anything. It can't practice virtue. And this is why too, if you really understood this, you know, if you have a cat and a dog at home and you go to work every day and there's your cat and your dog sitting there in 8 hours of total ignorance. It's just totally tragic. All you got to do before you go to work is turn on the CD, turn on your computer and let them hear the Dalai Lama's voice all day. Let them hear mantras all day. You could not give your animal a better gift. You could not give your animal a more precious gift. Because they can't do it themselves. So anything, even going in here, at any subtle levels, leaves deep impression in the mind and can help them at the time of death be hooked by the Buddha, you know. Unbelievably special to do that. Your old grandma, you know, in a coma even, keep the mantras on the whole time. So all these practices, first of all, to see and touch. The next one is what to talk about. Your auntie, your grandma, your sister, your daddy. So you've got to know them well. You've got to know where they're at, what their practice is. If they're really devoted, then it's easy to talk about reincarnation, easy to talk about their Lama, easy to talk about karma. But if they're not, you know, they have forgotten, let's say they're Christian or Hindu, they've forgotten about God for all these years, now they're worried and they're freaking out. You've got to be cautious and know how to talk to them, you know. So you don't sort of, like say your old auntie and she's a Catholic, let's say, and she's forgotten about God the last 40 years and she's worrying and she's confused. She might not want to think about God. So you don't say, think about God, Granny. You say, well, I've been thinking about God lately, you know, and she might love it. Oh, tell me more, you know. You help her mind think about it. This is one of the things, talk about the Buddha, talk about the Guru, because your job is to help the person be peaceful. And because when you're dying, your mind's all over the place, you need this kind of help. Listen to the mantras. First of all, talk about heaven, talk about, depending on who the person is, you understand what their practice is. You've got to know the person well, what kind of practice they've got. Then is what to listen to. Listen to all these different kinds of mantras. Listen to the teachings of the Buddha, listen to His Holiness. Just hearing it, even in your sleep, it goes in deep, leaves powerful impressions in your mind. You couldn't wish for better than this. Babies, animals, the ant, the mouse, same. So incredible. Yes.
Could you talk about craving and grasping now in this context? Do you encourage yourself to think of craving and grasping for a better birth?
You don't necessarily think of it like that. You just, given that we've got this craving and grasping, they're very primordial. We don't have to conjure them up. They're there anyway. So here we're trying to nourish the virtue in us by thinking of a virtuous thing, thinking of future life, thinking of the Pure Lands. You know, of course you'd do that. Of course you would do that. Because that releases your mind from holding on to this so you can move to the next. You know, it's a skillful means. Of course you would. This is one of the key ways to help people, Yes.
So if we harm somebody else or our environment or the people.
I'm so sorry, darling, what?
So if we are harming someone else around us, some other person, some other living being, so that is a bad karma we're creating for ourselves. But what in the case when a person is harming themselves? Suppose a person who is smoking, they know they're harming themselves.
Uh-huh.
So what is the kind of karma they're creating for themselves in that sense, in that case?
So we're not talking about death now, you're talking about just generally speaking.
Yeah, just
Well, sweetheart, if you look at the world, can you not notice everywhere around you sentient beings and humans doing things that are harming them? Forget even smoking, being angry, being jealous, lying. Do you notice that? So then your question is, how do you help people? Or you just want to know what karma they're creating? What do you mean by what do you mean by what karma they're creating? Everything you do that's motivated by negativity, you're harming yourself. What do you mean by because they smoke? What do you mean by that?
No, I mean they're harming themselves, not
But you mean their
else.
body?
Yeah, their own body, their own cells, not someone
Yeah, but
else.
so you're harming your body, so big deal. Who cares? But you just get sick. That's not what we're not talking about that. We're talking about the mind. It's much worse to see a person be angry.
Yeah, so in that case, you're creating negative emotions for yourself. So
But we are all doing that, aren't we?
Yeah.
This is the point I'm talking about. This is all the point about the discussion about karma. This is Buddha's point. The negativity we are creating by being angry, by being depressed, by being jealous, by being attached, without even harming others, we're harming ourselves. Would you agree with that? So we are harming ourselves, yes. So smoking, for example, is attachment energy, not to mention the additional thing of harming your body, and not to mention another level of it from the Buddhist perspective, maybe you're attracting very harmful spirits. That's another whole discussion. So the first point that we're making about karma is the first point is we are harming ourselves, darling. Not as other people harming themselves, harming ourselves. Can you hear that? That's the point, sweetheart. That's why we have to regret, have some self-respect, not want to do dumb things, try and work on our mind for our own sake. Then we can start to have compassion for others. Do you understand? Yes. Yes.
So things like anger and lust and greed one can control, but I find it very hard to control depression. When you're depressed, you think about being depressed and you get more depressed.
I understand, darling. So we'll forget about death now. We'll go back to the mind. We'll change track. The Buddhist view of the mind, on the face of it, seems kind of cute and simple. As you said, lust, anger, blah, blah, blah. These are the first level. Start to get hold of the really grosser levels, the way our mind works, that causes us to do dumb things that harm us, that then cause us in turn to harm others. We can see the evolution, can't we? So this is the first level of practice, to begin to control first our body and speech. Why? Because they're driven by these delusions, aren't they? I like to think of our body and speech as like the servants of attachment and the servants of anger. Would you see my point? That's the first level of practice, already stupendous. That's why living in vows and purifying every day is so marvellous. Atomic bombs on the negativity. Then if you like, that's like junior school level of practice. Now we've got to go to high school. And that's where we really start to be our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it, for the West, but it's really profoundly true. Now with concentration meditation, a bit of skill at focusing your mind, having learned the Buddha's model of the mind, you've got to learn it and see what he says about these different states of mind. Then you start to unpack and unravel your own mind, and you begin to harness the grosser level. Of course you do, but as of course you keep going, it's ever so subtle, ever more nuanced, all these levels of mind. But the point is, Buddha's view of the mind is very, very, very specific, and it sounds initially quite cute to us. Attachment, anger, oh yeah, big deal, We don't use all these fancy words like we use in the Western psychology. So depression is a really interesting one. If we analyse it carefully, we're going to see that it's internalized anger. But we don't think of it initially like that. So let me just try and describe. The Buddha's view effectively is that attachment is the main cause of our suffering day to day. It's really primordially deep. And I'm not talking the grosser levels of putting too much cake in the mouth and that kind of thing. I'm talking at a much more subtle level that drives us. It's like a motor that drives us. And we can only really get to see this when we start to really do what Lama says, is go deep inside, you know. But understanding this particular way that Buddha describes. So the fundamental energy of attachment first is this primordial feeling, so instinctive that we never question. It's like an energetic level, is I'm not enough. I don't have enough. It's a feeling of dissatisfaction. This is just energy that runs us every second since we're tiny, since we're born, darling. This is so primordial. And so, of course, we believe it's true. We believe we haven't got enough. We feel dissatisfied. So what do you think that's attachment. The next level of attachment on the basis of feeling you haven't got enough is you start hankering after something. Pretty obvious that you think that then when you get it, it'll fill up the hole. It'll make you satisfied. And that obvious level is the objects of the senses. That's a pretty obvious one, isn't it? So the next level of attachment is that it makes the object look more delicious than it really is. And then it brings all the anticipating and all the excitement. Do you understand what I'm saying? And then you get the cake in the mouth and you're so excited you can't, now you've finally got the happiness, but you keep putting the cake in the mouth and what happens? It's so delicious, the first mouthful, but I think it's downhill from there. So we put another piece in the mouth because we haven't got happy yet. And we put another piece in the mouth and we're still not happy. And then this terrible thing starts where the stomach is getting fuller every minute. You look at the cake and it doesn't look so nice anymore. It looks pretty jaded by now, but you're still not satisfied. And then eventually you've got to stop eating because you'd vomit otherwise. So what are we left with? Misery, more depression. I mean, not even depression yet. I'm going to go another discussion in a minute about depression. This is a gross and obvious way of this trap of attachment. How it lies to us. And in the end, all it brings is a stuffed stomach, acid reflux, too full, and then you can't believe it. And the next day you forget all about it and off you try again. This is called the gross obvious level of attachment. We all understand this, don't we? Now let's look at depression. So the subtle level of attachment, another way of talking about it, this is what my words for it, okay? It's like this frantic junkie within us that only can bear the nice things every millisecond. That's what it is actually, this driving energy, compelling us to always get the nice things, only the nice things. Attachment can only bear the nice things. And more precisely, which sounds very depressing, it's a frantic junkie that wants what I want every second. It's completely self-centered and it's frantic. Are you hearing me here? So this is now look what happens. Attachment is this constant motor that wants the nice things, wants what I want. And that's what propelling us unconsciously. Forget about the conscious level. Now look what happens in the day. 1,000 times a day, attachment won't get what it wants, will it? The red light, the annoying sound, you drop something, the person talks too long, the thing doesn't work perfectly, the food's a bit too cold, you wait too long for your coffee at the shop, and I'm talking baby things. So attachment's sitting there wanting what it wants, and then the second it doesn't get what it wants, honey, that second is now called aversion, or polite words for it, irritation, annoyance, frustration. We all use those words. They are polite words for aversion, which is the response when attachment is thwarted. But it's tiny at subtle levels that we never even notice and we take for granted. Are you hearing me now? Now, aversion at a volatile level is what we call anger. Now, I was good at that. It was evident the second that my attachment didn't get what it wanted when I was a kid. You wouldn't have to doubt because you would see me shout and yell and kick. You get me? You understand me? That's typical. That's called anger. Look at the world. So anger is a volatile energy of what's called attachment, which is the bare bones state of mind, which is what arises when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Can you hear me? Now, a person who is called depressed, that aversion arises when your attachment doesn't get what it wants, but it's the tiny things. We never pay attention. When you drop something, most of us, if we drop something, we get annoyed, don't we? We curse. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. That's called aversion, darling. That's called anger. Against whom? Yourself. We don't even think about it. I wouldn't go to my therapist because I dropped something. I think I'm insane. Send me home again. But we don't notice these little levels. So naturally, if you're the kind of person who's not volatile, who doesn't shout, who doesn't curse, who doesn't kick, who doesn't badmouth when you don't get what you want, Do you understand? But it'll go in and it'll build up slowly, internally. And one day you won't be able to get out of bed because you'll be so profoundly depressed. So depression is internalized aversion. Aversion is the response when attachment is thwarted. And attachment is thwarted 1,000 times a day in miniature baby ways, not to mention big ways. And we don't notice this stuff until it's the dramas and it's too late. This is how the mind works. But we don't think of it like this. But it's quite nuanced. Are you hearing me? So it gets us by surprise, depression. Are you hearing me? Do you recognize what I'm saying? Do you understand?
How do we reverse it then?
God in heaven, I knew you'd ask me that. I was hoping you wouldn't. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me. I was hoping if you think about it, you'll see the answer yourself. Because by saying this, the problem, by identifying a problem, it tells us the solution. It's exactly the same questions you asked before. Because your mind's bright and intelligent and you're rushing ahead and you're not listening. Because I'm not being rude, I am being rude, but hear me, because we're all the same. This is subtle stuff, darling. So by hearing our own mind every day, so the answer to this, darling, is every time something tiny goes wrong, like you drop something and you get upset, we don't even notice it. Start noticing it and then change the story. Tell yourself it's perfectly fine to drop something. Drop something else. It's okay. So if you do this tiny levels every day, by the end of the day, you will have dealt with your mind and you won't get angry and you won't be depressed because you're dealing with it when it happens. But we don't know how to do that because we're not brought up that way. And that's why we have to go to therapists 27 years later, because it's built up dramas. We never pay attention to our minds. That's what Lord Buddha's teaching is. He's been telling us for 2,500 years. Control your body and speech first. Live in vows and purify. That's the first answer. And put atomic bombs on your old habits. Then you learn some concentration. And then you start to see your mind every day. This is practice, darling. And it's pretty intense stuff. But this is the answer. Theoretically, can you hear me? And I think you're already doing it. But because of our addiction to dissatisfaction, you're always thinking you're not doing enough. You're always thinking you're not practicing enough. You always think you should do more. We're junkies, honey, because we're never satisfied. So that's what you've got to start changing and telling yourself you're doing a good job and you are doing well and you are a good person and you are practicing and you are sowing amazing seeds. And that is also a powerful daily practice, which sounds so corny, it's embarrassing, but it is beyond profound. Are we communicating? What do you think? So make a decision right now to start ticking your boxes at the end of the day and tell yourself what a good job you're doing. And it's not, because if we really did write down your good qualities, your good conditions, your good environment, your good things, your practice, and then you compared with some other people you would be crying in joy for that person who happens to be you. But we are addicted to misery. We are addicted to see the faults. We're never satisfied. That's why after 60, 70 years, I'm still not good enough. I'm still not doing enough. So whether it's money or food or our own qualities, we are junkies for seeing the negative. That's the tragedy of ego, darling. Are we communicating? Okay. So let's keep practicing, sweetheart. And keep rejoicing in what you're doing. Yeah.
Some years ago, I asked a similar question to Tushita, and I said, if I'm not feeling so attached and not so ambitious and not so, all sorts of things that seem to be positive from a Buddhist perspective, I said, but from a psychological perspective, they would be considered clinical depression.
Right.
And he laughed. And he said, I don't think you're clinically depressed. I think you're suffering from SMS, severe maturity syndrome.
What's that mean? What's he mean? I didn't get it.
Severe maturity system means that you have reached a point of a certain amount of wisdom, actually, of understanding not to be excited and not to be carried away. By some of these extremes of attachment.
I see.
And that it isn't really being depressed. But I think that there's always been this really challenging thing for the Buddhists who came out from Tibet when Westerners would be saying, we hate our yourselves, or you hate your parents, and it's like, it was a different way of looking, but I really thank you for the way you phrased it, in
I
terms
understand.
of the aversion
Yes.
to self,
It's interesting, isn't
and
it?
it puts the guilt
That's right.
in a way that you don't have to just try to swallow it, but
That's
you
right.
can now do something with it.
That's
You're
right.
giving a remedy.
That's right. See, and the other one, that's so good, yeah, that's right. But the other point I was saying to you, which is, I think when we start to do this one, this is when shift happens. It's like exactly the same as your first question, you know. You're doing all the work you said, but you still see you've got faults. So when we can really start to realise that it is a long process, and actually one of the signs of success, and they say that in the classic concentration meditation texts, the first of the night, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, when you start to do concentration meditation, a sign of success at the first of the 9 stages is you think you're getting worse. You think your mind's getting more neurotic, but we're not. It's just because we're noticing. So when we know that, then we have to be, basically what practice is having this immense courage to not be scared of our own mind, to not be scared of the delusions that we're seeing. They've been there for eons, so they're going to be there for a while. So I think the big step, the shift has to be glad you're seeing them. Like I like to call them my roommates. I just mean my thoughts. So it's like you're living in a house full of crazy roommates, and we are. Our thoughts, our crazy anger, our attachment, they're all there running rampant. So attachment, you see, can't stand them. Attachment only wants everything to be nice. So we can go against attachment and be glad to meet our roommates. Come on out. Let me see anger. Let me see the jealousy. Let me hear another level of jealousy. Oh my God, look at that attachment. And you greet them delightedly, because if you can't greet the problem, how can you find the solution? And that courage is what changes everything. Because the other one is just attachment, wishing would all go away. Do you understand? And that's our mistake. And we can do that for 60 years. But if we suddenly decide it's okay, the delusions are there, we're working on them, and then greet them, right there, things appear different to us. Do you understand? It's very tricky. It's kind of got to be skillful. You know. Like one of my sisters in Australia, you know, a lot of people get skin cancers, and 2 of my sisters got sort of light skin, and they get melanomas. So one of my sisters just went to the doctor just to check up, and the doctor happened to come across a little something, just by accident. And she'd be dead in a month if they hadn't found it. So initially Julie was really shocked, but instantly so happy to find it, because now she can fix it. So we can't see our delusions, we can't see the problems. I mean, it's like if you're learning to play the piano, it's like our attachment's so ridiculous that we just can't stand to see that we're playing wrong notes. I mean, that's insane. You'll never play better if you don't see it playing wrong. And you've got to keep delightedly finding subtle levels of mistakes so you can make it even better. But because we're so addicted to guilt, that's why we can't stand to see the misery. But if we got this proactive attitude, we're glad to see the mistakes at ever more subtle levels, because now we can fix them at ever more subtle levels. And that's the action one. What can I do about it? Instead of, I'm a bad person. But the depression one, I think, is very interesting, you know. It's not how we think in the West at all. Not modern psychology doesn't think of it that way. And I think that's the point. The level to which we have to have this subtle and introspection that Buddha's describing is not the level of introspection that we even in the best therapies in the West, there's nothing like it. Nothing is subtle. Nothing is nuanced. Very gross in comparison, I'd suggest, with the introspection we can get here using Buddhist techniques, you know. It's very interesting. Maybe time to go home. 8:09. Yes, sweetheart.
Could you say more about smokers attracting bad spirits?
Well, yes, so there's a whole other discussion here, you know, and that's something that's coming into Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book as well. Because one of the realms of existence of types of suffering beings that the Buddhism completely describes, and other beings, obviously other people talk about as well, and there's trillions of these beings. There are predominance of intense attachment due to past karma, and they're born as these disembodied beings, basically, that hover about, that freak people out, that cause suffering, that enter into beings, that harm them, that cause sickness. There's a whole spectrum of these beings, intense attachment energy, and some of them intensely negative. So, you know, people who hear voices, they're possessed by spirits so commonly. So then, what we say before about what? Oh yeah,
Smokers.
smoke. Okay, so cigarette See, I've heard the different lamas talk about tobacco is this particularly really heavy thing connected to very heavy harmful spirits. So cancer, for example, in Tibetan medical system, cancer is one of the diseases that is often triggered by harm from spirits. Tibetan doctors, when they look at your urine, they can see a certain way the urine is caused by harmful spirits. It's a really common diagnosis. And so hearing voices, that's spirits entering into your body, beings you've got some karma with who are literally harming you. And you hear there's so many stories. If you take this view, it's very fascinating. Animals can get harmed, babies, you know. And then smoking is one of the things that attracts spirits. Heavily, it's connected to them. Certain things like that. Alcohol too. Places where there's lots of alcohol, people are clairvoyant. They're just full of these unhappy, hungry ghosts and spirits, you know, beings, harmful beings. And they can be very harmful beings. That's how they talk. So particularly when a person's dying, one of the things that Lama Zopa says, that they say in the teachings, is to keep your pets out of the room. This is very upsetting to most people who adore their pets. But in particular cats, it seems they attract spirits. And their fur is kind of polluted and can attract spirits. So if they're around a dead body, and they attract, the spirits can come and enter the dead body, and that's not cool. That's how they talk. Things like that. Yeah. What else, people? Time to go home, I think. Yeah, time to go home. So we dedicate. We think we've been a couple of hours. All these thoughts, these ideas about karma, about how we create it, about how we purify it. These seeds we planted by listening. May we nourish these seeds with our practice from the second forward, our wishes to develop our marvellous potential, to never give up, to rejoice in our good qualities, so that we can develop, so we can become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes, so we can help others, no matter how long it takes, doesn't matter. Gewa Nyu Dudag Lama Sangye Drugyune Drowa Chikyang Malupar Dei Sala Gopashog Jangchob Semchog Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchig Ke Panyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Gavashog Kagri Rawe Korwe Jingam Dir Pendang Dewa Malu Jongwene Chenre Zigwang Tenzin Gyatso Yi Sharpe Site Badu Ten Gyuchi